Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello again, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome back to Modern Leadership. Now, if you've been a listener of this podcast for a while, or heard one of the previous 250 episodes, then you know I always sign off each week with the same challenge. Have a great day, make a great life, and stay awesome. Well, this week, my 7-year-old has been encouraging me to change it up a little bit. You see, as most parents, I tend to say the same things over and over to my kids. And one of the sayings, one of my mantras that has become standard in the Carlson household is everything is figure-outable. When my kids say I can't, or they complain something isn't going in their favor, I always tell them it is. And then I pause for them to finish with figure-outable. There may be some eye rolling involved. Well, the Stay Awesome has had a good run, and I truly hope you do stay awesome. But at the end of this episode, due to the subtle coaching of a 7-year-old, I will remind you that everything is figure-outable, which I think is a great lead-in to this week's chat with our expert. Our guest today is Chris Ahrens. Chris is the author of The Digital Helix, a Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestseller, Transforming Your Organization's DNA to Thrive in the Digital Age. He has helped launch dozens of companies and products using a unique mix of digital, sales, and marketing strategies. In 2006, he launched one of the first social media departments at AMD and later wrote the book Social Media Judo, the essential guide to mastering social media and delivering real results. Chris also teaches digital marketing at the University of Texas at Austin and has won numerous awards for his digital programs while working for clients such as, and you'll recognize these names, Adobe, Amazon, AMD, Cisco, Dell, HP, LG, Microsoft, Philips, and others. It is so great, Chris, to have you on the podcast. I've been eager to talk to you. How are you today?
I am wonderful, especially after that intro. But yeah, I'm excited to be here.
You know, as you're living through the life, right, it's just a day-to-day for you. I mean, you're working and you're doing. But then as you look back and you connect the dots and you go, yeah, I've worked with some tremendous companies. I've done some amazing things. And that's why I've been so excited to have you on. So first question for you. Aside from this business and this book, this digital expertise that you have, what did we miss by way of personal family in your life?
I have 2 boys. I live in Austin, and right now we're gripped by college basketball season around here because I went to the University of Nevada, and we have an outstanding team. So personally, that's been consuming a lot of stuff, and I have a softball game later tonight. So that's my life in a nutshell right now.
Well, it's great that you're keeping active and you're playing softball and doing all of that. But in your spare time, you found some time to carve out this expertise in digital, like just online stuff, this digital age. And talk to me a little bit about one of the things you say is we've come out of the industrial age. We're now in this digital age. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of take a step back because you said in my spare time. I don't think of it as spare time. I've always been opportunistic, and things have been presented, and I've looked and searched out opportunities. So when you talk about AMD and creating the social media department there, a full year before Twitter was even a thing. So when you say 2006, I mean that doesn't really say a lot, but a year before Twitter, we were doing social media at a very high level. It's just one of those things that I saw that there was an opportunity. I saw there was a need, and I found a way to kind of learn on the fly and do it. So I think that's really what kind of got us to this point and got us to the digital helix, is that there's things going in there. And if you talk to enough people, if you're inquisitive, if you really listen, you'll see there's opportunities all around you. Just most people kind of go through life with blinders, or they just kind of take things for granted or as matter of fact, and they don't see how to connect things and how to bring things together to maybe create a new opportunity, or even just kind of, up-level yourself to a new opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk a lot about millennials in the workforce, and of course now we've hit a stage in society where there are more than 50% of employees, people working in the workforce, are millennials, which have grown up with digital devices in their hands and understanding this digital age more so than myself, who's Generation X. And so I think sometimes because we're around it so much, it's hard to see those opportunities. And I feel the same way. Like I look at it and I know intuitively, I know in my gut that there's opportunity out there, but I'm having a hard time seeing it or finding it. And maybe I'm just a little bit behind the curve. How do I get in front of the curve a little bit?
Well, I think you look for the gaps. You look for where things are working, and you always keep trying to build a better mousetrap. And I think a lot of people, do it from an entrepreneurial standpoint. Like, can I turn this into a business? I tend to do it more from a tactical or strategic standpoint within a job. Like, it seems like the people around me are doing this, but they really want X. Or it seems like that a lot of people are not happy with this. Maybe there's a better way to get them the content, the strategy, the whatever they need. And so I think it's about looking at micro opportunities as opposed to life-changing opportunities, because if anything, with that, overly glamorous bio that you read, I think that if you put micro opportunities together, you get big opportunities. You build on these things like a series of Legos. They don't come up and just become the Taj Mahal in one fell swoop. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people.
I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face is this idea that if it's a good idea, somebody's already done it. Or I see this micro idea and I look at it and I say, clearly somebody, Twitter or Facebook or somebody else is doing this. How do I combat that?
Well, see, and I think that's a loser fallacy. That's and I don't want to say that readers are losers, but I fall into that too, or listeners, I should say. But I think that that's one of those things that prevents us from moving to that next step, from up-leveling ourselves. Yes, somebody has probably thought of it, but they may not have thought of it the way you're doing it. They may not have thought of it to the level you're going to do it, or they may not have thought of it in the neighborhood, the area, the skill, the expertise. I'll give you a great example that's just happened in the last couple of months here. I'm a big fan of the jobs to be done theory, which is in the Clayton Christensen book, Innovator's Dilemma. And it talks about how every person, every business hires companies, products, or services to do a job. And if you have this mindset, it really transforms how you go about marketing and selling your products. It's how you innovate products. Well, I saw it, and as a marketer, my first thought is, this transforms how you market products, not just how you innovate products. And so I've actually started creating tools and things like that actually talk about how this philosophy really is a game changer in a marketing fashion more than in an innovation and corporate fashion. And yes, somebody's probably thought of it. There's other great interests. And I'm talking about Clayton Christensen, who to me is almost a god of this industry. But I found a way to make it something unique for me and what my clients need, and bring a level of expertise that I previously was kind of hitting a ceiling with. So I think, you don't let somebody stop you. You don't let artificial surfaces kind of hold you in, or artificial walls hold you in. You find a way and you exhaust it. And I can't tell you how many times I have been told, yes, we're doing that. Well, then I can add to your idea. I can make your idea better. I can find a way to make our ideas together better. There's always a way. And I think that having that drive is what makes people better, not just the idea. We all have ideas. It's the drive to do something with it and maybe exhaust it, and then maybe put it back into play with some other idea later on in life.
And I want to see if I understand this Clayton Christensen idea. And I go back to this quote that some have attributed to Henry Ford. I don't know if this is accurate or not, but where Henry Ford would say, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a better horse and buggy, because they didn't know about the car. And I think this is kind of the innovator's dilemma, right? It's how do I not only come up with an idea that people are going to want in the future, like get ahead of what the need and the desire is going to be, but also have confidence in what I see coming around the corner, knowing that, my idea is going to be worthwhile. And so is that kind of the direction that you were headed?
Yeah. So let me give you an example that's, I believe, in the book. I'm actually fairly sure it's in the book. And I'll try to be as brief as possible, but it's really illuminating to me. And I'm actually doing this for a marketing course I'm teaching next week. So I've just prepared the whole lecture on this. So McDonald's wants to sell more milkshakes because milkshakes are a high volume or high profit item for the franchisees.
Sure.
So they asked Clayton Christensen's team to come in, and they sit and they watch customers at a select number of McDonald's for hours on end. And they noticed, not McDonald's, they noticed that a vast majority, or a disproportionate number, I should say, of milkshakes are sold between 6:30 and 7:30 in the morning.
And you wouldn't think that, right? Because we're talking milkshakes and we're talking mornings.
That's bizarre. And so the first thing is that, if I asked any marketer, any business leader, why do people buy milkshakes? It's because they're thirsty and want something sweet, right? That's the easy, simple answer.
Or it's hot and I want something cold.
Yeah, it's the easy, simple answer, but that doesn't get to what job the milkshake does. So they watch these people, and it turns out that the vast majority, 90%, are men. The greater number, 95%, all have a long drive ahead of them. Now you put those things together and you ask a few more questions of these individuals, and you realize the job to be done is I need a breakfast that's easy to eat, that keeps me busy, because milkshakes take forever when they're cold in the morning to kind of get through the straw, to keep me occupied on my long drive. And so the job is a kind of breakfast entertainment job, if you will, or occupation job, keep me occupied. And then the question isn't, well, don't you compete against Wendy's or Burger King or somebody else? It's no, I compete against jelly donuts and bars and bagels, all of which are too small, too quick to eat, too messy to eat in a car. They don't do the job as well as a milkshake. And so the first inclination would be, well, let's create a breakfast shake, which again is the wrong idea. The right idea is what McDonald's ultimately did with Clayton Christensen's help, is they created the triple thick milkshake.
Which they were still selling in the morning to these commuters?
Right. Yes. And now that it's triple thick, people understand that it's going to take them arguably 3 times longer. Now here's the interesting thing. So what they have to do now is thin out the shakes in the afternoon, because having a thick shake is not as desirable when you're trying to get through the meal quickly and get on the way with your day and you don't have a long drive ahead of you. But that little insight of just watching customers transformed how McDonald's thinks about customers and business and products and what they actually want. Because the simple answer is, I'm hungry, so I go to something convenient and fast if that's what my time and location dictate. And we're just a little bit more complex than that. And if it works with milkshakes, damn it, it works with everything.
And I love this example, and thank you for taking the time to walk us through it. But to me, it opens up 2 big questions. Question number 1, you've got this experience where you have Clayton Christensen's team coming in, and they're already set with built-in trustability, built-in, reputational capital. And so when they say to McDonald's, hey, you need to make your milkshakes thicker, McDonald's says, okay, I think we should do that. Versus I'm looking at some of our listeners that are maybe in middle management with their companies, and they're seeing these things happen. And then they're going to their boss and saying, hey, we need to triple the thickness of the milkshake. And their boss is saying, who's buying milkshakes at 6 a.m? So how do we overcome this, great idea, outside the box idea, but also get buy-in from those who are true decision makers within our company?
Because it's not an opinion, it's an insight. If you own the customer, like one of the things that I love doing, and I do it for every one of my clients because it is so incredibly important, and I love doing it so much, is sitting down and just talking to customers. And if you own those insights, and you don't have to talk to 100 or 500 or 1,000, I'm talking 10 or 20 really solid customers, 10 or 20 of the better or best customers your organization has. And if you bring those insights back in, it is not a question of opinion or who should do what. It's a fact. Customers want this. Customers are saying this is an issue. Customers saying if we did this, they would be happier. They would have a better experience. Then you become the focal point for the idea and getting the idea done and the expert in the room, as opposed to a guy or a girl who has an opinion, which is, as the saying goes.
Yeah, this is so very important. I love that you unpack this for the audience, because that's the way to build your reputational capital when it comes to these ideas. But I wanted to ask you, I love this idea of reaching out to our strongest customers, maybe 10 or 20 of them. Do you have some sample questions or things that we can ask so that we don't lead them? I've studied surveys. I'm an MBA background, and studying surveys, you want to write the survey questions such that you don't tip the answer. to get a valid answer. How do we, when we're talking to our customers, not tip the answer so we can get what they really believe and not just hear, hey, we need a better horse and buggy?
Surveys give you information, and some of those are insightful. But what we're talking about is a conversation. It's an intellectual curiosity. Like, tell me about your business. Tell me what you do. Now, you buy from us and you seem to buy these products. What brought you to us? Kind of why? How did you even find us in the first place? What were you using in the past? And you moved away from them. Why? As long as you're intellectually curious and trying to build this in your head and digest it, you will be amazed at how much an individual will open the kimono and throw it all on the table for you to enjoy and feast upon and learn from.
And I suspect you have to reach out to your strongest customers on this so that you don't get a bunch of pushback and a bunch of just complaining.
Yeah, well, but even sometimes the complaining is good. I mean, a customer who complains might be that insightful thing where you could come up with the better, bigger mousetrap that little micro insight that we talked about earlier.
Now, do you feel that you're coming up with these micro insights, these micro ideas, that there's some hesitation to proceed on them because of this fear that it's a little bit over my head? And I'll give you an example. Digital stuff, digital marketing, stuff on the web is not necessarily intuitive to me. Like, I have to really focus on it and think about it. And so if I come up with an idea and I go, okay, I think we need to do X, my first hesitation would be, I don't know how to do that.
So, I mean, that's where you go. See, it all comes back to this intellectual curiosity. So go see what other people are doing. I mean, it would be great. I would be thrilled as punch if I had an idea and it was perfect the first time I thought of it, or that it was complete the first time I thought of it. Never in the history of human history has that ever happened to, I think, anybody but maybe Bill Gates or somebody like that, or Steve Jobs, right? Yeah. Well, they just had an article where Bill Gates predicted 20 things in like 1999 and 19 of them already come true. So it's ridiculous. Now, there are individuals like that. I'm not that guy. And so I think when you start investigating, you start reading more, you start listening to podcasts, you start getting ideas and seeing where the boundaries are, where the opportunities are. And you talked about MBA, the SWOT, you do a little micro SWOT in your head. You don't have to do it on paper. I don't, but some people like doing that. And then you start thinking, and one of my big tricks, and I use this all the time, is that I will just get in a room, turn off all the lights and close my eyes and just think about the problem, and removing the outside distractions. I find that I start thinking about things that would not be readily apparent if I was distracted by TV or computer or, even lights. Just kind of being in that isolation, I come up with better ideas. And then you just start poking around the edges. You test the idea, you talk to people, and you see if there's any there.
And such a strong recommendation for taking time to be still. I think that's one of the big leadership problems that we face. The gap that we're going to have in the future is the fact that our leaders are so reactive, trying to put out fires. And then when they're not reacting to the fires, they're always consumed by either listening to podcasts or reading books or watching TV or being distracted. That stillness is a leadership trait that I think is in small supply and great demand these days. And so the next question I wanted to ask you then is, as we look at companies, and you've done some research on this and talk about this, we have these companies that do digital versus companies that are digital. And
right.
Let's talk about this difference between people who just participate in it and those who have truly embraced it.
Well, and I don't want to say it's people so much as it's organizational inertia and organizational design that kind of force fits people down a path. And so what we're really talking about is a digital mindset. And we have a free chapter up on the digitalhelix.com/download that you can download. It is the mindset, chapter 15, the mindset chapter from the book. It's a free download for all of your listeners. But that'll give you a real idea from Pete Carroll, the Super Bowl winning head coach, about how he trains his players to be ready for the unexpected, to thrive and change and things like that. And so when you look at how and why companies succeed, it's because they have a different mindset. Individually, yes, but at a corporate level. And so for a corporation to have a different mindset, the leaders have to have a different philosophy and mantra. The individuals have to be bonus, metriced, and evaluated on a different set of scales and measurements. I'll give you a prime example of that. For most of my life, you did good and you did bad. And when you did good, you got rewarded. And when you get bad, you got punished in some, punitive way. Right. And, if anybody's watched The Office Space, it's like the TPS reports thing, right? I just saw that the other day with my kids. Like, he sent out the wrong TPS report and 42 people have to tell him what an idiot he is, right? No consequence to the business at all. So when you live in that culture, there is no room for experimentation. There is no room to try to move the needle. There's no room to say, hey, listen, if we could connect these three things digitally and share these insights between our three groups or these three teams, look at what we might be able to accomplish. Then once we do that, look what we might be able to accomplish. There's no what if in that, because your sole motivation in life is to reduce the amount of time, pain, and effort that goes with making a mistake. And if that's the culture, there's no way you're going to transform, because transformation is almost embedded in the DEA against allowing it to happen. Because if you take the risk, your head could get chopped off.
Yeah, and I think that's what hesitates a lot. It makes a lot of us hesitate, right? I mean, it's this culture within some of the corporations and companies out there that says, I don't want to stick my head up or it's going to get whacked like whack-a-mole.
And that's where I think for the listeners, you have to say to your boss or to your team leader, whoever it happens to be, say, hey, listen, I have an idea and I think it's pretty good. But if you allow me to kind of, chip around the edges and see if there's real value in this, I'm going to learn something from this. I'm going to learn whether it is a good idea, how far it can go, what it might lead to, and how it might work. And here's what I'm hoping is going to come out of it. Most team leaders, providing you're kind of doing it on the side, are going to say, okay, that's interesting. Why don't you go try it? Why don't you tell me what you're doing? And then maybe they can help make your idea better because they kind of see that there's a reason to do this. But you almost have to kind of ask for an excuse rather than permission to kind of get to that level. Otherwise, the sad fact is you're in the wrong company trying to do things that the company doesn't value, which is push the envelope.
Well, and how do you feel about the whole idea of asking for forgiveness rather than permission? I mean, sometimes when you have an idea, kind of get moving in that direction.
Well, I told you I grew up in I went to the University of Nevada. I grew up in Nevada, and so I like betting as much as the next man. But that's a big bet in some corporations. If your corporation, your entity, your group doesn't value experimentation, doesn't value risk taking, and you're the individual that takes that risk, I think we know how that bet's going to turn out eventually. Maybe not on the first try, but certainly on the second or third. And so that's a bet that I wouldn't want to make. I would try to figure it out. And if you look at the history of Silicon Valley, if you look at the recent history of, all of these digital native startups, almost every one of them, I think the statistic is 82%, 84% of startups, the individuals who started the company came from a bigger brand, and they found a gap in what the big brand was doing, and they exploited it to start a new product, a new company on their own, because they had all of this great knowledge, great insights, and they really didn't see a way forward to do it inside their own organization.
And we could probably, as you mentioned, show hundreds of examples of this, but a really common one was just Apple Computer, right? I mean, Steve Wozniak was working for HP. He offered the idea to HP, and HP said, nah, we don't want to do it. And so Apple was born.
You can keep unpeeling that onion. The idea for the GUI interface came from Xerox and Xerox PARC's innovation group, and they didn't know what to do with it. And they basically gave it to Steve Jobs. I mean, you could go back and back and back, and then you could go forward and forward and forward. That's why I say you have to look at these little micro things, and you have to have this mindset that I'm going to try to connect things, pull things together, ask the what if questions and see if there's any there. And when there's a little thread, I just keep pulling until I see that there's no room left, or that it turns into something that I can do something with. And sometimes it might be adding 5% to your job, but that might be the most exciting and fun part and eventually become the most valuable part. So where you, like I did, I left AMD and started a social media agency because I was the only guy who knew how to do it.
Yeah, such a great story. And before we get to the next section, I wanted to ask you, could you pick out a little bit, maybe one of the biggest mistakes organizations are making as they transition into this digital age or try to keep up with it?
Well, let's see, there's a couple, but the biggest one, that's tough because it's kind of individualistic by corporation. But I think that the lack of experimentation and the lack of connectedness. So, a lot of times digital starts in the marketing department, because you had mentioned, marketing is now, solely digital, or digitally focused, I should say, digital centric. And so a lot of it starts with marketing and being digital with marketing. And then all of a sudden that bleeds into sales, and that might bleed into support and bleed into other things. But it starts there. The problem is, a lot of times, and this is in the book, and it's one of my favorite examples from the book, is that you will see somebody say that we need to be digital, and they'll have this, this burr in their saddle. They're excited, they're gung-ho to be digital. And so Michael Schrag, the head of MIT's Innovations Lab, told us a story when we were interviewing for the book. He said, I went into a sales team, and very proudly, the sales manager said, look, we're digital now. We've given all of our salespeople iPads. And Michael Schrag, who's probably one of the 5 most brilliant men I've ever met in my life, and maybe if I lived 5 lives, he'd still be in the top 2, says, shrugs and laughs it off. And the sales leader's like, what do you find so amusing? He goes, what are you doing with these insights? What are you doing with the data you're collecting? What are you doing behind the scenes to take your information and share it with marketing, share it with products, share it with support, share it with everybody else in the organization? All you've really done is taken either a manual computer process and made it mobile, or a paper process and put it on a tablet. You haven't digitized crap. All you've done is whitewash something and call it digital in a really, thinly veiled attempt to just be digital on the surface, but not transform what it is inside your organization that allows digital to thrive and really give you the benefits that digital provides, the really successful companies. And so I think that's what I think a lot of companies miss, is that there's a surface level digital, and there are pockets of the organization that are just fine. And I call it, when it's marketing, I call it checkbox marketing, right?
Yeah.
You have a quarterly review, and you have a slide that has all the checkboxes on it, and you check them all off like a good employee and say, look, we did all 5 of these things. Well, yes, you did, but you didn't do any of 5 of them well, and none of them contributed to real business results. But now you'll get your 2.5%, 3% raise, and you'll go along for another quarter until the next time you're asked to throw up your checkboxes. That's not digital. That's pushing things forward at a snail's pace.
And we've been having a digital conversation, and that example that you just gave is more than just digital. That's cultural, and that's kind of where we're at as a society. We've got to break out of that within our companies and get to the innovation, get to doing things, not just surface changes, but really to do things differently if we want to distinguish ourselves and grow. I mean, the reality is that the world's moving so quickly. Innovation's happening so quickly that if we're not keeping up, we're already behind.
Right. Or you don't know what you don't know until you go there and find out what you don't know. And then you might be pleasantly surprised or have a new path or opportunity in front of you that you never envisioned the day before. Until we started talking about social and bloggers and things like that at AMD, I didn't even care about digital. I didn't know what digital was. I certainly didn't know anything about social. But once I got involved, I'm like, this is the coolest, most effective thing I've ever done in my life. Where in the hell has this been all the time? And then I just dove in and had to learn and do everything. And it turns out I was pretty good at it, so you never know.
Yeah, this has been such a great conversation. And I got to tell you, I'm super excited to jump into the Digital Helix and read through this. You've got me excited to get a copy and read through it. But alas, for this episode of the podcast, we only have a few minutes left, and it's time to transition to my favorite section, Learning from Leaders, where we ask a couple of questions about you. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So our first question, the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table, what are you reading?
It is Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, because I'm doing this lecture for a marketing class, and I read it about once a year, if not more, because I think it's that impactful. But I just reread it. I'm rereading it again because I want to nail the points and not kind of miss any of the nuance that's in there. So it's good. It's Innovator's Dilemma.
And there's some great takeaways from that. I mean, your preparation level and the way that you care about what you're doing really shows in your level of study and preparation. But the book itself, timeless books and timeless principles are worth a reread. So great recommendation. The second question is, what is your leadership superpower?
I would say it's connecting things and seeing next steps. So, I mean, that's what this whole podcast was about, is really kind of exploring and then, connecting 1+1+1, and then getting something that's greater than the sum of its parts, which is, if you read the book, you'll see it's in the book about 1,000 times. But I think that when you do that, that becomes my superpower, because I can put things together and come up with new ideas, new insights, and new ways to solve problems that, frankly, I'm surprised people haven't thought of before me, or at least I didn't know they thought of it. And I've turned it into something for myself.
And 30 to 50 years ago, when we wanted to see the future, we would go to the circus and we would go to the tent and we would look in the crystal ball. But today, to see the future, we sit down with innovators like yourself that can really read what's coming through technology. And I love this. Next question is your motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by.
All right. So I just posted this right up before Christmas, and I've been misquoting this for the longest time. And then I wanted to post this before Christmas on LinkedIn. And so I went back and I actually looked at the full quote, and I realized how much more powerful it is. I'm going to read it to you. And since you've asked all the questions, I'm going to ask you to guess who said this.
Okay.
And when it was said. There is no time for complacency. This is no time to abandon the drive and the optimism and the imaginative creativity which has characterized this country since its birth. This is no time for timidity or doubt. This is a time for boldness and energy. This is a time for stout-hearted people who can turn dreams into reality.
Roosevelt.
John F. Kennedy, August 30, 1960. 59 years ago, almost 59 years ago, he made this as a statement when accepting the nomination for president. And every time I read it, I literally get goosebumps. I mean, the fundamental part of it, which applies so much to digital in my mind, is this is a time for boldness and energy. Don't be timid. Don't kind of slosh through life. Don't kind of say, I might, could, I would, I don't know. It's a time for boldness and energy. And with all the stuff, with all the tools, with all that's around us, I just really find it reassuring in the way that it's structured and in the energy that it has from it.
What a terrific quote. And I appreciate you bringing it up and sharing it with us. And it's interesting that we're looking at 1960, and then you look at his presidency, as short as it was, and the actions that he took. He really lived what he was trying to portray in that quote right there. So a great quote, and goosebumps myself.
I could have said it was, said by, Zuckerberg or anybody who's a digital luminary today,
yeah.
And you wouldn't have batted an eye for even a second, right?
That's why I was trying to guess Roosevelt.
Yeah, and that's well, I kind of I led the witness a little bit, but I think that's why it's one of those things that, the world kind of goes in these little paths, and it was an absolutely time for boldness and energy back now. And what he means by it is different than what it means today. But I think the sentiment, the mindset behind it is a motivational thing that when you see it and read the full thing, it really is elegant and it is timeless, almost timeless.
Yeah, terrific. And then our final question then is the book that you most often gift to friends, family, or colleagues.
I would say it's probably most often Good to Great.
Which is, on this podcast, I just want you to know, the number one book that I talk about. It changed my life when I read it.
Yeah, I mean, and when you kind of told me that this question was going to come up, I had to think about it, and then I had to think who I actually gift books to, because I don't often gift books. But when I do gift books, it's usually to younger people, millennials, students, things like that. And I find that between Innovator's Dilemma and Good to Great, if you read those and internalize those, you're going to have a different way of looking at the world from a fundamental standpoint that's going to set you on a path.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Have you read Great by Choice?
I have. I really enjoyed it.
That's actually the book that I most often gift. Because
that's a good one.
I like how he took Good to Great and evolved it into Great by Choice. So anything by Jim Collins is terrific.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being this week's guest expert. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice, and how can we find out more about you and, of course, pick up copies of your book?
So the book is pretty much everywhere. Amazon is the easiest, but it's at Barnes & Noble. They can always get it. But Amazon's obviously the easiest. I am on LinkedIn at Caarons, Caarons, or you can always go to thedigitalhelix.com /download will get you the download page. And there's always a ton of information and resources on there if you just want to learn about kind of thinking and being digital as an organization or as an individual. But, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to meet up with some of your listeners.
And we're going to connect all this up on the show notes page so they can go to one place and get linked to it all. And I got to tell you, Chris, this has been one of the most fascinating conversations for me. You started out with this McDonald's story, and I just loved it. You hooked me in from the beginning, and I just really appreciate all the expertise that you brought to this show. Thanks for being this week's guest expert.
Oh, this was an absolute delight, and I'm so glad we're able to connect. This was fun.
All right, my friends, that was a very exciting interview for me. And after I hit stop on the recording, we continued on for another 10 minutes talking about this. And I got a question for you. This came out of our further conversation. I got a question for you. What color is a yield sign? And I was quick to the punch. I said, yeah, it's yellow with black writing on it. And he said, do you know that since 1970, the yield sign has been red? And I said, no. Why did I think it was yellow? And my guess is many of you hearing this probably thought the same thing when I said that. Oh yeah, I know yield sign is yellow. Because we know that yellow means yield when it comes to like seeing the flashing light or the light on the, on the green red light. And our mind makes these shortcuts so that we can process other things in our lives. And so it makes this shortcut, yellow, yield, the YY. Anyway, it's just so fascinating that as I hung up with him, this is the only thing on my mind right now is how many times I was so certain that the color of the yield sign was black and yellow, and yet I'm wrong. Very interesting. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode of the podcast can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML113. That's for episode 113. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life, and remember, everything is figure-outable. Nod to my 7-year-old. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.